Jurassic Park. One of my all-time favourite films, so the release of 2018's Velociraptor chase was a must-buy for me, and a perfect choice for upgrading to display. As much as I love the LEGO set, there isn't a great deal of detail in there, so I really wanted to flesh it out and make it a little more true to the film. I used a number of reference images to pick out extra details and work out the layout of the areas we see. Recreating the LEGO set in software allowed me to quickly make adjustments and test how things would look without having to keep tearing apart the physical build, while also giving access to a much greater range of parts. My first step was shifting things around to fit on a standard base plate, so the kitchen had to be pulled in alongside the control room. I also had to shorten it a little, as I'd worked out that the laboratory and control room were separated by a walkway that I needed to make room for. I really wanted to have the raptor from the LEGO set peering in through the window of the control room door, as it does in the iconic movie scene, but the software didn't at the time have the model available, so I had to make do with the dragon as a stand-in. Close enough. I created a rough passageway between the areas, and deduced that an angled window in the lab likely meant that the walkway ended with a staircase down to the control room door. But in order to accommodate for this, I needed to shift the embryo storage further from the door, and that also meant moving the kitchen. Again. After filling in the passageway with a rough metal walkway and stairs, and positioning sections appropriately, I turned my attention to that big square window. This is of course supposed to be a big round window, as per the movie, but I wasn't aware of any big round window panes in LEGO's parts catalogue, so I tested some different arches just to see how they might look. Feeling uninspired by my window effort, I turned my attention back to the lab and building a staircase down from the walkway. I had a little experience of building curved staircases through my Batcave build, so I had a rough idea how to make this work. The staircase follows the curve of the large window surrounding the embryo storage. Thankfully, LEGO makes some nice curved panels appropriate for this, but the sliding door felt like less of a possibility. Another memorable scene from the film comes from the visitors watching a raptor egg hatching in an incubator. I tested a couple of different shapes for this, but I really wanted to know whether I could animate the robotic arm as part of my planned interactive element. My main interactive idea for this build was to animate the door to the control room using a hand-wound crank, similar to my Steamboat Willie display. I had a plan to have the door swing back and forth, as though being pushed by the characters and the raptor. To make this work, I needed to adapt the door to open and close using a mechanism, so I initially replaced the spine of the door with Technic, but after spending the time on several revisions and physically building my final choice, I realised that it wouldn't actually open due to the spine being pressed flat against the wall. Hinges need to be sort of off-axis or something. I did try one last door design with a rounded spine, but the less said about that, the better. So I reverted to the standard door and had a rethink. I liked the idea of having the door spring open, as though being pushed hard by the raptor and close slowly when pushed by the characters. I didn't have any springs available at the time, but I'd seen a few LEGO builds utilising a rubber connector to create a springing action. Testing out my idea, I found that it actually worked quite well, so I adapted the build to make it a little more discreet, but I still had to work out how to push the door open to start with. Finding that the rubber connector thing worked nicely as a spring, I now needed a way to open the door. I liked the idea of the raptor's snout pushing through the open door crack, but I'm not particularly advanced at building mechanical things, so let's see how I get on with simply opening the door first. In order to pull the door closed, I needed a leverage system rather than rotational. I had an idea that using short lift arms pushing against one end of a longer lift arm would create a pulling force from the other end. I could have connected the lift arms together, but that would have created one smooth, continuous back and forth, rather than the springing action I wanted. With a rough lever system in place, I needed an attachment point. Using Technic created a nice solid connection, but I made a slight error with the first iteration. I knew I needed to account for the angle of the lift arm changing as it moved, but I forgot to account for the angle of the door changing. It was a simple fix with a ball joint. I felt that the short lift arms weren't working as effectively as I wanted, as they could occasionally jam against the swinging lift arm and other times miss it entirely as it rotated too far. I worked out that a poker, for want of a better word, rotating horizontally would better catch and release the swinging lift arm. A lift arm struggled a little with this job of poking, as the narrow radius meant more force was required to push the second lift arm. A wider and more rounded cam piece gave a better result. Satisfied that the system would work, I refined and strengthened the build, but I still wanted to get that raptor head poking through the door. Following the session, I did some work off stream to save people from watching the hours of reworking. I rebuilt the door mechanism, replacing the rubber connector with a spring, introducing a crank handle, and replacing the single cam with 2 lift arms with curves. I'd also introduced a sliding floor system for Dr. Sattler, allowing her to move with the door. Dr. Grant was going to be a little trickier to add, however, as I wanted him to be standing, just as the characters are in the film. Ultimately, I wanted the crank handle to be at the front of the display for easy access, but in order to drive the big beveled gear I'd added, I needed to bring some gears up to it. I'll save you the torment of watching the struggle, which ultimately brought me back to exactly where I started from. You're probably thinking, just run a stack of gears up that lift arm. Well, I did try that, but there wasn't enough torque, and there was too much movement in that vertical drive shaft. I needed something to hold it steady, but it wasn't so simple restraining it while not interfering with other moving parts. Ideally, I'd restrain it from the top, but that meant using longer lift arms. But a straight lift arm wouldn't be as stable, and the largest L-shaped lift arm isn't really an L shape. I was also trying to restrict how wide this whole mess would be, so as not to take too much space from the laboratory. After what felt like weeks and my brain now turned to a warm soup, I finally managed to create a system that worked, and didn't tear itself to pieces. Not entirely, anyway. Remember that sliding floor piece? I wanted this to slide back and forth with the door, but I couldn't easily attach it to the door as the changing angle would require a complex connection system. I felt attaching the floor plate to the swinging lift arm would be a better idea, but it still wouldn't be a simple task. I couldn't attach anything that would impede the movement of the lift arm, but extending the lift arm and attaching to the end of it would generate a larger movement than I wanted in the floor plate. Using a very short lift arm as a go-between successfully reduced the movement, but it created a sort of latency. I was getting close though. My bigger problem would be attaching Dr. Grant.